Today we're going to be talking about the beginning of the Civil War. And we have been talking about the causes of the Civil War for a long time, but today it's actually going to start. People are going to start shooting at each other. So the long wait is finally over. The South is going to secede, and the North and the South are going to fight. Here are your goals. Okay, so we'll pick up from the place where we left off in our last video with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Abraham Lincoln won the presidency, even though he did not win a majority of the votes. He still wins the race. Abraham Lincoln was against the spread of slavery, and he was also just against slavery in general. But he was also a Unionist. That meant that he wanted to keep the United States together no matter what. And Abraham Lincoln was able to win, getting all of his votes from the North or from California or Oregon. So he was elected only by free states. This meant that the South had no stake in Lincoln, and basically the South hated Abraham Lincoln. So South Carolina reacts to Abraham Lincoln's victory in 1860 by seceding from the Union in December 1860. And in early 1861, 6 other southern states also secede. These are the states that are most dependent on slavery. They are in the deep South, and you can see there on the map Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida all secede in 1860 or 1861. But, interestingly, the rest of the southern states remain in the Union for now. They kind of just want to wait and see what's going to happen. So, at this point, it wasn't 100% clear that there was going to be a war. Some people in the government still thought that they could prevent the war and get the southern states to come back by forging yet another compromise along the lines of the Missouri Compromise or the Compromise of 1850. And this compromise is called the Crittenden Compromise. And it was designed to get the southern states to come back or to keep the other southern states from seceding. And what this one did is it promised to protect slavery in all territories south of the famous 3660 line, even territories that had not yet been added. This would mean that if the United States went on to fight a war to capture Cuba, slavery would be allowed there. Same thing goes for Texas or really anywhere south of that line. So this was potentially a pretty good deal for the slave states because they could spread slavery as far south as they wanted to. But this was rejected by Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln thought that it was a matter of honor and a matter of principle not to allow this compromise to go through, because he had promised not to allow the spread of slavery. And that's exactly what the Crittenden Compromise was. It was banning slavery in the North, but it was allowing it to spread in the South. And he didn't think this was right. He also thought that passing this would mean that there would be more or less constant war against the countries south of the United States as the southern states continued to gain more and more slave territory. And so with this, the compromise fails, and the states are going to have to look to some other way to resolve the issue of secession. So what did it mean that the southern states seceded? Well, as we've already talked about, to secede means to leave. It's basically just a fancy word for leaving. But so what does it mean for the states that leave the United States? Well, what it means is that they form their own government. They give themselves the name of the Confederate States of America and elect new leaders, most famously President Jefferson Davis, who you see pictured there. And they go on to do other important stuff that governments do, like raising taxes and whatnot, but most importantly, they begin to organize their own army. And so by 1861, the Deep South was already set up and was ready to run itself as an independent nation. But Abraham Lincoln, who was a Unionist, refused to recognize the new country and insisted that they were still part of the United States. So there was obviously a lot of tension between the North and the South in this time period between Abraham Lincoln's election in 1861. But there was still peace. Nobody had started fighting yet. But this would change with the events in South Carolina dealing with this fort called Fort Sumter. So one thing that happened after the secession of the southern states was that the southern states began seizing U.S. government property. So they would go around and they would basically claim stuff that used to belong to the United States. Arsenals, places where they kept weapons, shipyards, and army bases. They would all claim those and make them part of the Confederacy. But Lincoln refused to give up some federal property, especially a couple of forts off of the southern coast. The most important fort of these was Fort Sumter, which was on an island off the coast from Charleston, South Carolina. And this fort could protect the harbor and keep Charleston from trading, which was a big deal. And so South Carolina demanded that Abraham Lincoln give up this fort, but Abraham Lincoln refused and even tried to send in new supplies to the fort. When South Carolina found out that Lincoln was sending new supplies to the fort, they attacked and took over the fort by force after bombarding it for several days. This is often seen as the first act of the Civil War. And there was widespread backlash resulting from the attack on Fort Sumter, both in the North and the South. In the North, there was widespread outrage at the attack. The North could not believe that South Carolina had attacked a fort flying the flag of the United States. And before, the North had kind of not wanted to fight, but after, the North was angry and ready to go and march on the South. And at this time, Lincoln decided it was time to go to war. So he issues a call for troops, and he begins assembling an army in the North, getting it ready to march to the South. The South also reacts to all of this. The South views Lincoln's call for troops as the beginning of an aggressive invasion. And this makes the South feel like it's being attacked, because it is. As a result of this, 4 border states that had not yet seceded now secede and join the Confederacy. These states are Arkansas, Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. But, very importantly, 4 other border states don't secede. So these are states that have slavery, but that choose to remain with the United States. And these states are Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. A lot of people think that if these 4 states had not decided to stay with the United States, that the Civil War might have been unwinnable for the North. But so anyway, with this reaction, the war was now on. There were now 11 southern states that were going to fight the United States for their independence. Abraham Lincoln was assembling an army in the North and getting ready to march south to force the South to surrender and to accept their place within the United States. All right, there you goes. So hopefully at this point you guys can now give a clear explanation of why the Civil War began. If you can't, let me know and I will try to help you with that as much as possible.